He shamed her on a live mic until a royal father walked in and ended him. Monica Hayes didn't hear the orchestra anymore. All she heard was her husband's laugh, echoing off crystal chandeliers as Trent Hayes leaned into the ballroom microphone, tuxedo perfect, eyes bright with victory. "Smile, Monica," he said, loud enough for every donor, board member, and camera to catch. "Let them see the woman who tricked her way into my family." A hot wave crawled up her neck. Her wedding ring, plain gold, nicked from years of hand-washing at the hospice, felt like a brand. She lifted her hand without meaning to, as if it could hide it. The giant screen behind Trent flashed a slide he hadn't told her about. Identity report. 8:14 p.m. Under it sat her younger photo, and beside it a red stamp. Fraud suspect. Gasps rippled across the tables. Monica opened her mouth, but the crowd's whispering swallowed the first sound. She couldn't push past the wall of suits and gowns. Trent's boss stood at the aisle, arms crossed, watching like a judge. And when Monica took one step toward the stage, two hotel guards moved in front of her, palms out, trained to keep the program running. Trent turned to the room as if he were doing them a favor. "I'm applying for CFO. Our foundation needs integrity. So tonight, I'm correcting a mistake." He looked at Monica again, softer, crueler. "Hand me the ring." "You didn't earn the name." His hand stayed open, waiting. Cameras on tripods pivoted toward her. Somewhere a phone buzzed with a live stream alert. "Foundation Gala. Now live." Monica's knees trembled. She thought of her mother's rehab bill in her purse, like the one Trent promised to pay next month if she behaved. She thought of the anonymous complaint that put her nursing license under review, filed 2 days after she refused to sign a blank transfer form. On the screen's corner, a tiny embedded timestamp kept counting, and Monica saw one more detail Trent didn't notice. The video feed showed a side hallway, and a tall man in a dark coat paused beneath a crest-shaped lapel pin. Up in the security control booth, Eleanor Shaw was already downloading the raw recording. Audio, timestamps, and the moment that man arrived. Monica Hayes was 47 and ran on coffee and duty. By day, she worked hospice intake. By night, she covered extra shifts because her mother's stroke rehab wasn't covered the way the brochures promised. Every morning before she slept, she lined up pills in a plastic organizer, labeled the slots in thick black marker, and left a note on the fridge for her son. "Eat. Call me. Lock the door." People at work trusted Monica. She spoke softly, held hands when families couldn't, and never billed for the extra 10 minutes she spent explaining a form. When a patient's daughter cried in the hallway, Monica was the one who found a chair and a tissue, not a camera. She kept a photo of her mother and 16-year-old Caleb in her locker, taped beside a list of overdue invoices she refused to let win. Trent liked to call that her little savior complex. He also liked to keep her tired. He paid the mortgage from an account she couldn't see, cut up her spare debit card for safety, and told her friends she'd been too overwhelmed to meet. If she asked questions, he smiled and said she was imagining problems again. On the morning of the gala, Monica came home in scrubs that smelled like disinfectant and winter air. Trent was in the kitchen, already in a tuxedo shirt, scrolling his phone with 2 thumbs, not looking at her. A foundation email popped up on his screen, just long enough for Monica to read the subject line. "Live stream run of show approved." His jaw tightened as he swiped it away. "You're late," he said, like she'd missed an appointment with him, not saved someone else's mother from dying alone. "I had to call your mom back," Monica answered. It was a habit she couldn't break, checking on other people's parents, even when her own couldn't stand without help. Trent finally looked up. "Wear the blue dress. No talking to the board unless I introduce you. No, and bring your driver's license." "My license?" Monica frowned. "Hotel security. New policy." His tone was casual, but his fingers squeezed the counter hard enough to whiten. Monica went to change, and in the mirror she caught her ring again, the small dent from the day she slammed a car door while rushing to the ER with her mother. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt a cold pinch under her ribs, as if the air in the apartment had shifted. In the closet doorway, she saw Trent's suit jacket hanging open. An envelope inside stamped, Report, 8:14 p.m. Monica didn't stay with Trent because she was blind. She stayed because leaving felt like pulling the only plug keeping her mother breathing. Her mom's rehab center sat 20 minutes away, and every visit began the same. Monica signing the clipboard, smiling at nurses she secretly envied for having normal lives, then lifting her mother's thin arms into a warm sweater. The stroke had stolen her mother's words first, then her balance. On good days, she could say "Moni" like a prayer. On bad days, she stared past her daughter like the lights were too bright to recognize anyone. The bills were worse than the illness. Monica kept them in a manila folder inside her work bag, tucked behind patient intake forms so she wouldn't cry at red lights. One invoice read $18,740. Another said "past due" in block letters, as if shame could make money appear. The rehab director had been kind, but kind had limits. "We can't hold the bed forever," she'd warned, voice soft, eyes firm. Monica's paycheck should have helped, except Trent made sure it didn't. He insisted they use one household account, then change the login. He told her it was safer if he handled payments. When she asked for access, he called her ungrateful, irrational, dramatic. Words he used so often she started checking herself before she checked him. Then came the complaint to the nursing board. 2 days after she refused to sign a blank transfer form for tax reasons, an email arrived. Notice of investigation. The accusation was vague but deadly. Documentation discrepancies, possible diversion, pending review. Monica knew it was nonsense. She also knew nonsense could still cost her license, her job, and the insurance that paid for her mother's therapy. Caleb needed her too. He was 16, tall and quiet, pretending he didn't hear the late-night arguments through thin walls. And his school had sent another notice about tuition arrears, and Monica had promised him, "I'll fix it," even though she didn't know how. That afternoon, she checked her phone and saw a bank alert. New device added. Password changed. Her throat tightened. She tried to call Trent, but it went straight to voicemail. A second later, his text arrived, simple as a knife. "Don't make a scene tonight. Remember who pays for your mother's bed." Monica sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the manila folder, feeling smaller than the paper inside it. Then another message lit her screen, from an unknown number. "He's preparing paperwork to ruin you. Do not sign anything tonight." The Hawthorne Hotel ballroom smelled of lilies and expensive perfume, the kind that clings to tuxedos. Crystal chandeliers threw light onto round tables dressed in white linen and iced water glasses. Along the walls, black tripods held cameras with red Arik dots, and a small sign near the entrance read, "This event is being recorded and streamed live." Monica noticed it the way a nurse notices a warning label. Too late to ignore, too important to forget. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Monica took sparkling water instead, fingers shaking around the stem. Her blue dress was modest, tailored for a woman who expected to work, not pose. Trent had said it made her look respectable. Tonight it made her feel like an exhibit. The foundation's logo glowed on the huge screen behind the stage, waiting for the donor awards. The microphone rested on its stand like a judge's gavel. From a corner booth, staff checked audio levels, calling out numbers into headsets. Monica spotted a thick envelope on the podium, sealed, labeled 8:14 p.m., program insert. Her stomach tightened. Board members drifted in clusters, laughing softly, speaking in totals and titles. Trent's mother kissed Monica's cheek without warmth and whispered, "Don't embarrass him." Caleb wasn't here. Trent said teens didn't belong at real events. Monica hated the relief she felt at that. Her phone buzzed again. "Unknown number. Don't let him get you alone." Monica glanced up and saw uniformed security at both ballroom doors, hands folded, eyes scanning. There was no easy exit without passing them, and every watching face. Then Trent appeared from the VIP corridor, but not as her husband. His smile was wider, his posture rigid, like he'd practiced in a mirror. He didn't take her hand. He adjusted his cufflinks and nodded to the board chair, already performing loyalty. When he finally looked at Monica, his eyes slid past her ring as if it were already removed. He leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Whatever you think you know," he murmured. "Tonight you keep quiet." From the control booth window, someone raised a tablet, framing Monica and the stage in a live feed. Trent Hayes didn't marry Monica for love. He married her because she made him look decent, steady, family-minded, safe. In the years since, he'd turned that decency into a leash. At their table, he kept her clutch in his lap so it wouldn't get stolen. And when Monica reached for it, his hand closed over her wrist, smiling for the nearby donors. The gesture looked tender. It wasn't. Inside the clutch were her ID, her only credit card, and the rehab invoices he'd like to wave around like proof she owed him. Trent spoke to everyone else like a statesman. To Monica, he spoke in corrections. Don't laugh so loud. Don't stand like that. Don't mention work. Every rule was designed to remind her she didn't belong in his world unless he allowed it. Tonight he was hungry. He'd grown up in a cramped rental with a mother who counted coupons, and he swore he'd never be the man begging again. So he skimmed from the foundation's vendor line, then searched for someone to blame. The CFO seat was opening in January, and the board chair's daughter, Lila Drummond, was rumored to be the deciding voice with the biggest donors. Monica had seen Lila's hand on Trent's forearm during cocktail hour, heard Lila's whisper and his low chuckle, intimate as a secret. When Monica looked over, Trent's smile tightened, warning her not to look again. He rose between courses and made a slow circuit of the room, collecting handshakes like signatures. Integrity matters, he told a group of men in navy suits. We can't risk scandal. He let the word hang, then glanced back at Monica as if she were the scandal. When he returned, he slid his phone across the table so only she could see. An email draft filled the screen. Formal request. Rehab discharge for non-payment. The cursor blinked over send. You push me, he murmured, and your mother loses her bed by morning. Monica's throat went dry. Why are you doing this? Trent's gaze stayed pleasant, public. Because I'm finally fixing my mistake. He stood again, heading for the stage. As he passed the audio booth, he stopped, pulled a small USB drive from his pocket, and placed it in the technician's palm. The technician nodded and glanced at the envelope marked 8:14 p.m. Trent checked his watch, 8:13, and smiled like a man about to light a match in a crowded room. Monica didn't go looking for trouble. She went looking for air. She slipped from her table while applause covered her footsteps and followed the VIP corridor toward the restrooms, passing framed photos of past golas and men in tuxedos, shaking hands like they owned the city. Halfway down the hall, she heard Trent's voice, low, confident, not the public charm he wore like a mask. She'll fold, he said. She always folds. Monica stopped behind a tall, potted palm. The corridor opened into a small lounge where staff staged extra programs and gift bags. Trent stood near the service door, adjusting his bow tie. Beside him was Lila Drummond, 36, sleek in a silver gown, hair pinned like a crown. The board chair's daughter, the donor princess. The woman who'd been touching Trent's arm all night as if Monica wasn't even there. Lila laughed softly and tapped her phone screen. Monica caught a glimpse of the Foundation app interface and a file name. Insert_8-14_Monica. Lila's nails were perfect, her smile sharper than glass. You're sure the identity report looks official? Lila asked. Trent's mouth curled. It is official. Official enough to ruin her. Your father wants a clean foundation. I want the CFO seat. We both get what we want. And your wife? Lila tilted her head, pretending curiosity. Trent shrugged like Monica was a bad investment. A necessary sacrifice. Lila stepped closer. Make sure she hands over the ring. That matters for the optics. Returned property. People love a clean story. Monica's stomach turned. Ring. Returned property. Like she was a thief who needed to confess on command. Then Lila reached into a clutch and pulled out a thin folder. Monica recognized the top page by its header, the same format as the email from the nursing board. Lila held it up between two fingers. I also forwarded the complaint, Lila said, voice casual. If she tries to fight back later, she won't have a license to stand on. And if she calls the press, we call her unstable. Simple. Trent exhaled, pleased. That's why you're worth more than any donor check. Lila's gaze flicked toward the corridor, toward Monica's hiding place, like she could smell fear. She smiled and leaned in, whispering something Monica couldn't hear, then brushed her lips against Trent's cheek, slow and possessive. Yet Monica's hands shook so hard her phone nearly slipped. She wanted to run, to scream, to expose them right there. But two security guards appeared at the far end of the corridor, walking toward the ballroom, blocking the only clear exit. Lila's eyes locked on Monica's shadow behind the palm, and she lifted her phone as if she'd been waiting to capture her. Lila didn't confront Monica outright. She did something colder. She helped her loudly. With a polished smile, Lila stepped into the corridor as if she'd just discovered Monica by accident. There you are, she said, voice sweet enough to carry. Trent has been looking everywhere. Come on, don't worry. These events can be overwhelming the first time. Monica's cheeks burned. Two passing staff members glanced at her like she'd been caught wandering somewhere she didn't belong. Lila's hand rested lightly on Monica's elbow, guiding her back toward the ballroom doors where the security guards stood like gateposts. Inside, the room had shifted into program mode. Lights dimmed, conversations lowered, cameras angled toward the stage. Trent spotted them and raised his glass, not in greeting, but in ownership. He didn't walk to Monica. He stayed where the important people were. Lila steered Monica straight toward the board chair and a cluster of donors. This is Monica, Lila announced, bright and breezy. Trent's wife. She's very devoted. She's been through a lot, haven't you, Monica? A donor woman in pearls glanced at Monica's plain ring and gave a pitying smile that felt like a slap. How brave, she murmured, as if Monica were a charity case in human form. Trent finally approached, while slipping an arm around Monica's shoulders for the cameras. His grip tightened just enough to warn her. My wife keeps us humble, he said to the donors, laughter in his voice. She's great at, what is it, honey? Cleaning up messes. A few people chuckled. Someone repeated it, cleaning up messes, like it was clever. Monica swallowed hard. She wanted to say, I'm a nurse. I hold dying hands. I keep families from breaking. But she could feel the trap closing, the board chair's measured stare, the donor's amused attention, the lens of a nearby camera drifting closer to catch her reaction. If she snapped, she'd look unstable. If she cried, she'd look guilty. Trent leaned in, lips near her ear still smiling for the room. Good, he whispered. Stay small. He slipped his hand down, palm open, hovering near her ring finger, as if he were testing how easily it would come off. Then, over the soft swell of applause from the stage, Monica heard Trent murmur to a guard by the aisle, voice flat as a contract. At 8:14, you take her out. No arguing. We're live. Monica turned toward the glowing cameras and realized they weren't filming a gala anymore. They were filming her downfall. The ballroom lights dimmed another notch, and the Foundation's anthem video began to play. Applause rose on cue. Monica felt it like pressure on her chest, not celebration. Every clap sounded like a door locking. On the far side of the room, the control booth window glowed. Through the glass, she could see screens stacked in neat rows, 4 camera angles, a live chat feed, and a scrolling time code in the corner. The numbers were so bright, they looked unreal. 8:13:42, 8:13:43. Counting towards something only Trent seemed excited about. Monica tried to steady her hands around her water glass, but her fingers wouldn't listen. She forced herself to breathe the way she taught families in hospice. In through the nose, out through the mouth, slow enough to keep the panic from turning into a scene. A staffer walked by with a clipboard. Monica caught a glimpse of the run sheet. 8:14 p.m. special segment. Insert video plus mic handoff. Under it, in smaller type, Cam 2, wife reaction / Cam 4, aisle close-up. Her stomach dropped. They had planned where to point the lens at her face. She looked up and found Trent near the stage steps, shaking hands like a politician. Lila stood close, whispering, smiling, he holding her phone at waist level like she was filming already. When Lila turned her screen slightly, Monica saw a preview window with a paused frame of Monica standing at the table. Her own image captured without permission, a still shot ready to become evidence against her. Then a sharp, familiar sound cut through the music. An email chime from the tech table. The audio assistant leaned over a laptop, and the subject line flashed large enough for Monica to read from a few feet away. Upload confirmation. Identity_report_final. Scheduled 8:14 p.m. Below it was a sender name Monica recognized from the donor list, L. Drummond. So it wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coordinated hit, signed and scheduled like a delivery. Monica's vision narrowed. She started forward, one step, and then another, but a guard drifted into her path as if guided by invisible string. "Ma'am," he murmured politely, "please stay with your party." Trent glanced over and gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He tapped his watch once. A silent warning. In the booth, a woman with silver hair and an earpiece leaned closer to the monitors, eyes hard, not amused, watching the time code roll. Eleanor Shaw reached under the console and pressed Save Raw Footage, locking the recording with Trent's name stamped on it. At 8:14 sharp, the anthem video faded and the MC's voice filled the speakers. "Before our next honoree, we have a special integrity moment," he said, reading off the teleprompter like it was harmless. Trent stepped onto the stage with an easy smile and lifted one hand toward Monica, not inviting, summoning. Aunt Camera 2 swung to her table. The red REC dot blinked. "Monica, sweetheart," Trent called, warm for the room, cold in his eyes. "Come up here, clear this up." Monica stood because 1,000 people were watching her stand. She tried to walk toward the aisle, but the nearest guard shifted with her, matching her step. Another guard appeared at her other side. Polite hands, firm boundaries. "Ma'am," the first guard murmured, "your husband asked we escort you." They didn't take her to the stage. They guided her through the side corridor into the small lounge by the service door, where the music was muffled and the air smelled like linen and printer toner. Lila Drummond was already there, phone in hand, recording. The board chair stood with crossed arms, his face carved into disappointment. And Trent shut the door behind them and dropped the smile. "No theatrics," he said. "Sign this and we end it quietly." He slid a single page across the folding table. The header read, "Voluntary Statement of Misrepresentation." Under it, Monica's name was typed in bold, along with her birth date. Correct. A line below demanded she surrender any marital property obtained under false pretenses, including her ring. "I didn't lie," Monica whispered. Trent tapped his phone. On screen was the rehab director's email address, a draft message already written. "Discharge effective immediately. Non-payment." His thumb hovered over send. "Your mother's bet," he said softly. "Your license, your son's school. Choose." Monica's stomach twisted. She reached for her phone, but Lila stepped in, smiling. "We don't want you calling anyone to spin a story," she said, and turned Monica's screen face down on the table. From the hallway, Monica could hear applause, Trent's voice rising again on the stage through the speaker system, rehearsed and righteous. She was trapped between the door, the guards, and a signature that would erase her. Trent opened the sealed envelope marked 8:14 p.m. and placed a second document on top, divorce papers stamped filed. The lounge door opened and the guards guided Monica back into the ballroom like a prisoner returning to court. The MC's smile faltered when he saw her face, but Trent didn't miss a beat. He waved her onto the stage, one hand on the mic, the other holding the folder he'd forced in front of her. "Thank you," Trent said, voice warm. "For allowing me to protect this foundation." The screen behind him flashed the same header again. Identity report. 8:14 p.m., then a close-up of Monica's driver's license photo, blown up so large it made her look like a suspect. A red stamp slammed across it. Fraud. The livestream chat scrolled along the bottom, hearts and question marks and laughing emojis. Monica tried to speak. A guard's palm hovered at her back, a reminder. Don't cause trouble. Trent lifted the divorce packet for the cameras. "Tonight I discovered my wife has been living under a false identity," he said. "And because integrity matters, I'm filing immediately." A low gasp rolled through the room. Trent's mother pressed a hand to her pearls. The board chair's eyes narrowed as if he'd been waiting for this excuse. Lila stepped up beside Trent, perfectly composed. "Yet we verified it," she said, loud enough for the microphones. "Multiple sources." Trent turned to Monica, smile sharpening. "Return the ring," he ordered, "and we'll end this with dignity." That ring held more than gold. Inside the band was a tiny engraving, Caleb's birth year, because Monica had worn it through labor, through her mother's stroke, through every night shift Trent never thanked her for. Her fingers shook as she tugged. The ring stuck on swollen skin. Trent watched her struggle like entertainment. "Help her," someone whispered. No one moved. Finally, it slid free. Trent snatched it and held it up to the cameras like a trophy. "Property returned," he announced. Then he nodded to security. "Escort her out. She's not a guest." The guard stepped in, and Monica felt the room tilt. Faces turning away, chairs scraping back, donors avoiding her eyes as if shame were contagious. In the back row, the tall man with the crest-shaped lapel pin stood up, and every camera began to turn toward him. The room didn't erupt, it recoiled. Chairs scraped back in small, offended motions. People leaned toward each other not to help, but to decide what story they wanted to believe. Monica felt it in the way eyes slid off her like she was a stain on the linen. "Fraud," a man muttered near the front. "I knew it," a woman whispered, as if she'd been waiting to say it for years. Trent stood tall beside the microphone, wedding ring now gone from Monica's finger and shining in his hand like proof. He didn't look sorry. He looked relieved, like he'd finally found a clean way to throw her away in public. The guards tightened their formation. One stepped slightly ahead of Monica, just creating a moving wall. Another stayed close behind her shoulder, close enough that she could feel heat through his sleeve. It wasn't rough. It was worse than rough. Professional, practiced, unavoidable. As they guided her down the aisle, donors turned their bodies to block their spouses from having to brush past her. A board member who'd once thanked Monica for organizing a hospice fundraiser glanced at her shoes and pretended to fix his cufflink. Trent's mother stared straight ahead, lips pressed into a line as if looking at Monica would admit she'd loved her once. Monica tried to speak, just one sentence, just a name, just the truth. But the MC's forced laugh filled the speakers, smoothing the moment into program. Camera lenses tracked her every step. The livestream chat on the screen kept scrolling, too fast to read. But she saw the words that mattered. Liar. Gold digger. Arrest her. At the back row, the tall man with the crest-shaped lapel pin rose to his feet. For a heartbeat, the room hesitated because he didn't stand like a curious guest. He stood like someone with authority. His gaze locked on Monica, not judging, recognizing. He lifted one hand, palm out, a silent command. "Stop!" A guard near the exit glanced toward the control booth window as if waiting for instruction. In that same instant, Trent's smile flickered, just once, like fear had found him. Outside the ballroom doors, the air turned colder. The noise dulled. Monica's lungs finally pulled in a full breath, and it came out as a shaky sound that wasn't a sob. Not yet. She reached for her clutch, needing her ID, her rehab invoices, the nursing board letter. Anything real to hold on to. Her fingers found nothing, and Monica realized her clutch was gone. The ballroom doors shut behind Monica with a soft click that felt louder than the microphone ever had. The guards didn't shove her. They didn't need to. They simply stepped away, as if her shame was already punishment enough, and the hallway swallowed her whole. Her left hand hung at her side, bare. Without the ring, her finger looked pale and exposed, like skin that had been protected too long. She tried to reach for her clutch again, reflex, like checking a pulse, then remembered the empty space. No ID, no credit card, no rehab invoices, no nursing board letter she'd kept folded like a threat. The little folder that proved her life was real was gone. Monica stumbled into a service stairwell to hide from passing guests. The air smelled like bleach and cold metal, and a single security camera stared down from the corner, its black lens unblinking. She pressed her forehead to the painted cinder block and finally let her breath break. Tears came hot, then silent. Not pretty, not cinematic. The kind that happens when you've held it together too long and your body decides for you. She thought of her mother's hands, thin as paper, reaching for her in the rehab bed. She thought of Caleb's text from earlier. "Mom, you okay?" And the answer she'd never send. "No, I'm not." A flash of Trent's voice hit her again. "You didn't earn the name," followed by Lila's calm cruelty. Returned property. Like Monica was an object, like her years of work and wiping mouths and paying bills with overtime were nothing but fraud. She slid down the wall to the floor, knees pulled to her chest. Her phone screen lit up with 3% battery. She should call someone, but who? Trent had made sure there was no someone. Friends drifted away. Family ties snapped quietly. Even her own confidence had been rationed. Monica stared at her trembling hands and heard her own voice in her head, steady in a way her body wasn't. "I'm done begging." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist and forced herself to stand. If Trent wanted her erased, she would have to become visible again, on purpose. She took one step toward the stairwell door, then froze as footsteps approached from the corridor, measured and certain. Her phone buzzed once. A new call, unknown number. A calm woman's voice came through the speaker. "Monica Hayes, don't hang up. I have the recording, and you're in immediate danger." Monica kept the phone on speaker, one hand braced on the stairwell rail. Listen," the calm woman said. "My name is Eleanor Shaw. I run security for the hotel. Your husband is using our live stream and an edited insert to frame you. I saved the raw feed, but you need to move." Before Monica could answer, her screen flashed low battery again. She rushed out to the service corridor, heart hammering, and the phone died mid-sentence. She tried the ballroom doors. A guard blocked her with a polite smile. "Ma'am, you've been asked to leave the premises." Outside, winter wind slapped her cheeks. She walked to the valet stand, hoping Trent had left her keys. The attendant asked for ID. Monica's bare finger curled into her palm. My purse was taken." The attendant's expression softened, then hardened into policy. "I can't release a vehicle without identification." Her own card wouldn't help anyway. A bank alert popped up on the dark screen when it briefly revived. Account frozen, suspected fraud. Then another. Direct deposit redirected. Trent hadn't just humiliated her, he'd erased her. Her next buzz was a voicemail from the rehab center. Monica borrowed a stranger's charger for 30 seconds and listened, shaking. "Ms. Hayes, we still haven't received payment. If we don't have a confirmed plan by 9 a.m., we'll begin discharge paperwork." Then came an email from her hospital HR, stamped urgent. "Administrative leave pending board inquiry. No shifts, no pay, no insurance." She called Caleb, straight to voicemail. She pictured him at home, dinner cold, wondering why his mom wasn't answering. She opened the rideshare app and stared at the screen. Add payment method. She had none. Monica sank onto the curb by the loading dock, hugging her arms, feeling smaller than the dumpsters behind her. Across the street, tinted black SUVs rolled up to the hotel's side entrance, and staff suddenly stood straighter, as if royalty were nearby. Footsteps approached. Monica looked up, ready to flinch. A silver-haired woman in a dark blazer stopped in front of her, holding a tablet like evidence. Her eyes were steady, not pitying. "I saw everything on the monitors, Monica, and I kept the proof." Eleanor Shaw didn't offer Monica pity. She offered a plan. "Stand up," Eleanor said, handing her a wool coat that smelled like clean laundry, not perfume. "You're freezing, and you're not staying out here where his people can grab you." Monica followed her through a staff door into a warm security office. A space heater hummed. 2 monitors showed the ballroom from different angles. Yet on one screen, Trent was already laughing with donors again, as if he hadn't just destroyed a woman on live video. Eleanor set a tablet on the desk. "This is the raw feed," she said, "not the edited insert, timecode, audio, and every camera angle. Your husband's identity report was uploaded from a donor Wi-Fi account registered to Lila Drummond. I pulled the network log." Monica's knees weakened. "My mom, he's threatening her rehab bed, and my license, they put me on leave." "I saw that too," Eleanor said. "He told a guard, at 8:14, you take her out." "It's on audio, and the hallway camera caught him handing a USB drive to the tech table." She slid a folder across the desk. Printed pages, not screenshots. Keycard entries, door timestamps. A copy of the run sheet with wife reaction typed like a target. Eleanor tapped the top page. "These are hotel records. They don't disappear because a rich man wants them to." Monica swallowed. "I don't have my purse. I can't even get home." "You're going to a staff safe room for the night," Eleanor said. "Then we call your son from my office line so Trent can't spoof the number. Tomorrow morning, I connect you with counsel and our foundation compliance officer. If your mother's facility tries discharge, we'll document coercion and intervene." Monica stared at the monitors, shame turning slowly into a hard, hot resolve. "Why are you helping me?" Eleanor's eyes didn't flinch. "Because I'm 60, and I've seen men like him win by counting on women to stay quiet." A knock sounded on the door. Eleanor opened it just a crack, listened, then closed it again, her face changing. "He's here," she said softly. "I know the gentleman with the crest pin. He asked for you by your full birth name, and he brought papers no one else should have." Monica's breath caught when Eleanor whispered the name. Lady Monica Ashford. Eleanor led Monica into a small conference room off the security office, the kind used for staff briefings and quiet disputes. A pot of burnt coffee sat on a warmer. 2 men waited inside, one in a dark suit with a diplomatic lapel pin, the other tall and broad-shouldered in a plain black coat that somehow made the room feel smaller. The tall man didn't look at Monica like a stranger. He looked at her like a father who'd been keeping his distance on purpose, and hated himself for it. "Monica," he said quietly, "you've been called Mrs. Hayes for a long time, but that is not the name you were born with." Monica's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The suited man opened a leather folder and set it on the table, careful and precise. "James Caldwell, legal attaché," he said. "These documents are certified and verifiable through consular channels." He slid the first page forward, a long-form birth certificate with raised seals, listing Monica Elizabeth Ashford. Next came a notarized guardianship order from decades ago, an adoption file that didn't erase the birth name, only protected it. There was a recent DNA match report stamped by a lab, and an embassy letter confirming identity and lineage without turning it into gossip. Monica stared until the letters blurred. "Why now?" "Because your husband forced it," Eleanor answered, tapping her tablet. "His identity report was a forgery meant to call you a fraud. But the irony is, that it triggered a real verification request through a vendor the Foundation uses. That request pinged a protected record, one tied to consular security. That's why the gentleman with the crest pin was alerted. The tall man reached into his coat and placed a small case on the table. Inside lay a signet ring, old gold, worn smooth at the edges. "Your mother kept you safe," he said, "but she also kept this promise for me. If you were ever shamed publicly, if you were ever threatened, my duty was to step forward." Monica's empty ring finger ached like it remembered everything. Eleanor turned her monitor so Monica could see the evidence lined up like stepping stones. Raw ballroom footage with time code, audio of Trent ordering security, network logs showing Lila Drummond's account uploading the insert at 8:13, and keycard entries proving Trent met Lila in the service lounge, and a clip of Trent in the corridor saying, "Clear as day. She'll fold. She always folds." "Chain of custody is clean," Eleanor said. "This is court safe. This is board safe. This is truth." The tall man's jaw tightened. "And I will confirm it where it matters. Before witnesses." Eleanor pulled up one last camera angle. Lila slipping Monica's missing clutch into her own bag. At 8:12 p.m., in full view of the hallway lens. Eleanor didn't waste time. She pulled up the ballroom clip and scrubbed to 8:12. Lila's hand vanished into Monica's clutch, then the clutch vanished into Lila's bag. "Theft," Eleanor said. "Simple, provable, and it explains why you had no ID outside." James Caldwell laid the documents in a straight line like an evidence table. Birth certificate with raised seal, a guardianship order, adoption file, embassy confirmation, and the lab's DNA match. "Your husband's fake report forced a real verification," he said. "The foundation uses a vendor that checks identities for live stream releases and donor compliance. When Lila uploaded his identity report, she triggered an automated query. Your birth record is protected." That query pinged consular security. It reached Prince Edmund Ashford within minutes. The tall man nodded once, jaw tight. "I kept my distance because you asked for a quiet life," he said to Monica. "But I promised your mother. If anyone tried to break you publicly, I would step forward, openly." Monica's pulse thudded in her ears. "So Trent's fraud claim backfired," Eleanor said. She tapped another window. Network log showing the upload from L. Drummond, and plus a time-stamped email confirmation. Then she opened audio from the corridor. Trent's voice came through clean. "She'll fold. She always folds." "That's intent," Eleanor said. "Not confusion." James added one more sheet. Hotel keycard history. "Trent and Miss Drummond met in the service lounge at 7:58 and 8:09, he said. "And at 8:13, he handed a USB to the tech table. We can subpoena the file and compare it to the raw feed." Monica's hands trembled. "Even if it's true, he controls my money, my job, my mother's bed." Eleanor leaned in, eyes steady. "You're not powerless." She pointed to the monitors. "With theft on camera, we can get police involved tonight. With coercion on audio, we can stop the discharge threat. With the raw footage, the board can't pretend they didn't see." Prince Edmund opened the small ring case again, but didn't push it at her. "I won't buy you," he said. "I'll stand beside you. The rest is yours to choose." Eleanor's radio crackled. "Mr. Hayes is back on stage," a voice said. "He's calling for security to confirm removal." Eleanor's finger hovered over one button labeled Send to Ballroom Screen. The moment Trent smiled into the microphone again, Eleanor hit Send, and the raw truth started loading on the giant screen. The ballroom screen flickered, then went black for half a second. In that half second, Monica felt something inside her click into place, like a lock finally turning the right way. Eleanor watched the upload bar crawl across the monitor. "Once it plays, he'll try to talk over it," she warned. "He'll claim it's edited." "Then we don't let him control the story," Monica said. Her voice surprised her, steady, clear, not pleading. James Caldwell slid a pen toward her. "First, a statement for theft of your clutch. It establishes why you had no ID and protects you from flight accusations. Monica signed, then looked at her bare finger. The skin where the ring had been was pale, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt free. She took Eleanor's office phone and dialed Caleb. When he answered, breathless and scared, Monica didn't apologize for existing. "Listen to me," she said. "Your dad is lying. I'm safe. You stay home, lock the door, and if anyone comes, you call 911 and then Mrs. Keller next door. I'll be there soon." Caleb's small, "Okay, Mom," sounded like a lifeline. Next, she called the rehab center. Eleanor put the call on speaker and calmly stated, "Any discharge tonight will be documented as coercion tied to extortion. Ike, we have recorded audio." The administrator's tone changed instantly, less firm, more careful. "We can hold until morning," she said. Monica felt the fear try to rise again. Trent had trained her to fear consequences, but now she had consequences too. Real ones, with timestamps and witnesses. Prince Edmund stepped forward, not touching her, only offering a presence. "I will confirm your identity publicly," he said. "But this is your fight. You decide how we step back into that room." Monica took a breath. "No more begging," she said. "No more explaining myself to people who enjoy misunderstanding. We walk in with facts. We name the theft. We name the coercion. And we demand the board pause the program and call counsel, right now." Eleanor nodded once, approving. "We'll cue the clip, then you speak. Short, clean. Truth." Monica smoothed the sleeves of her blue dress, wiped the last tears from her cheeks, and stood tall enough that her spine didn't feel borrowed. She turned toward the ballroom doors and said, "Take me back to the stage." Monica rode the service elevator up with Eleanor on one side and James Caldwell on the other, the hum of machinery replacing the gala's polite music. Eleanor handed Monica a simple black blazer from the staff locker. Clean lines, nothing flashy, then slid a hair tie over her wrist like armor. "No makeover," Eleanor said. "Just clarity." Monica tucked the printed evidence into a thin folder. Network logs with Lila Drummond's donor, Wi-Fi ID, the run sheet targeting wife reaction, keycard timestamps, and the still frame of Lila stealing Monica's clutch at 8:12. James carried the sealed embassy letter and certified identity papers. Prince Edmund kept the signet ring case in his palm, closed, as if he understood Monica didn't need objects. She needed dignity. At the ballroom entrance, a guard stepped forward. Eleanor flashed her security badge and held up a tablet showing the live feed. On screen, Trent was smiling into the microphone, saying the word integrity like a prayer. Behind him, the giant screen suddenly changed, black for a blink. Then a new title card appeared. Raw Hotel Recording. Time code verified. A ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned, phones lifted. The livestream chat paused, then exploded again, faster this time. Trent's smile faltered as the audio played. His own voice in the corridor, clear as day. "At 8:14, you take her out." No arguing. "We're live." Gasps hit the room like wind. Monica stepped into the aisle. The cameras found her instantly, but this time she didn't shrink. She walked straight, shoulders square, folder in hand. Lila stood near the stage steps, lips parted, color draining from her face. When the screen cut to the hallway angle, Lila's hand appeared on video, sliding Monica's clutch into her bag. The timestamp burned in the corner, 8:12 p.m. The board chair rose halfway from his seat, stunned as Eleanor approached and placed the printed logs into his hands. James followed, setting the embassy letter on top, official, sealed, undeniable. Monica looked up at Trent. "You wanted integrity," she said, voice steady. "Start with the truth." Trent lunged for the microphone and barked at security. "Grab her, now, before that video finishes!" "Grab her, now, before that video finishes!" Trent barked, lunging toward the stage edge like he could wrestle reality back into silence. Two guards moved, but not toward Monica. Eleanor stepped into their path and raised her badge, voice cutting clean through the chaos. "Stand down. Hotel security answers to me, not to a guest." The raw feed kept playing behind Trent, Lila's hand sliding Monica's clutch into her bag. Then the corridor audio rolled again, louder this time, the time code glowing in the corner like a sworn statement. At 8:14, you take her out. No arguing. We're live. A donor woman covered her mouth. Phones rose higher. The board chair snatched the mic from its stand and turned toward the tech table. Cut his audio. Now. Trent tried to laugh it off, palms up, acting wounded. Yeah, this is a hack, he insisted. She's unstable. She's been under investigation. James Caldwell stepped forward and held up the sealed embassy letter. This is not a hack, he said, calm as a courtroom. These are certified identity documents with consular verification. Chain of custody will be provided. Monica took the mic the board chair offered her, only for a second. I never asked for your money, she said, looking straight at Trent. I asked for basic respect. You responded with extortion. She raised Eleanor's printed logs. Your donor Wi-Fi account uploaded the fake identity report. And your girlfriend stole my ID so I couldn't leave or defend myself. Lila's face tightened, and she edged backward toward the aisle. Eleanor didn't chase her, and she simply tapped her tablet and projected the still frame again. Lila's hand in the clutch, timestamp locked. Theft on camera, Eleanor said. If she leaves, we notify NYPD with the clip. The board chair's voice shook with fury. Trent Hayes, you are suspended from all Foundation duties effective immediately. Security. Keep him here until counsel arrives. Trent's eyes went wild. He grabbed for Monica's folder, trying to rip the pages away. Prince Edmund stepped forward at last, tall and unhurried, and placed himself between them. That is enough, he said. Quiet, but the room went silent anyway. I am Edmund Ashford, and this woman is my daughter. A wave of shock rolled across the ballroom. Trent froze, then snarled, desperate. She's lying, she's not... Trent suddenly lunged again, reaching for Monica's bare hand like he meant to crush what he'd already taken. Trent lunged for Monica's hand, but he didn't get to touch her. Eleanor moved like she'd done it 100 times. One sharp command, one clean step, and 2 hotel officers intercepted him. Trent fought, shouting about fraud and my wife, until the board chair's voice cut through the noise. Call NYPD now, and lock the footage. When the police arrived, Eleanor handed over the theft clip, the corridor audio, and the network log showing the 8:13 upload from Lila Drummond's donor account. Lila tried to slip out during the confusion, but the hallway still frame flashed again on the giant screen. 8:12 p.m., her hand inside Monica's clutch, and she froze as an officer asked for her bag. Monica's ID and credit card were inside. So were printed copies of the nursing board complaint. The ballroom went quiet when Prince Edmund stepped fully into the light. He didn't give a speech, he gave proof. James Caldwell presented the sealed embassy letter and certified records to the board chair and the police, then to the Foundation's attorney on speakerphone. The lie couldn't survive paperwork. By midnight, the Foundation issued a public correction to every donor and the live stream audience. Monica Hayes had been framed, the identity report was an unauthorized insert, and Trent Hayes was suspended pending criminal and financial investigation. 2 days later, an independent audit found what Trent tried to bury: embezzlement through vendor invoices. The CFO promotion vanished, so did his friends. His mother refused to take his calls, and the nursing board review ended fast once Eleanor's recordings and the theft evidence were submitted. Monica returned to work with her license cleared, her name restored. The rehab center agreed in writing to hold her mother's bed, and the Foundation, eager to make amends, paid the past due balance as part of a formal settlement. Monica didn't ask for luxury. She asked for safety, a clean apartment near the rehab facility, tuition caught up for Caleb, and a bank account in her own name. Months later, Monica stood in a small church with winter sunlight on the pews. Her mother sat in the front row, wrapped in a soft shawl, smiling the way she could. Caleb walked Monica down the aisle. Prince Edmund stood quietly in the back, present, respectful, letting her lead her own life. And when Monica said yes to James Caldwell, steady, honorable, patient, she did it with her head high, not as a rescue, but as a choice. So that's how this story closes. And hey, are you still here with me right now? If you really made it to this moment, then something in Monica's journey touched your heart in a quiet, personal way. And I think we both know why. Because the real lesson isn't royalty, it's this. When someone humiliates you publicly, they're counting on your silence, your exhaustion, and your fear to keep you small. But truth has weight, especially when it's supported by receipts, timestamps, and witnesses. One of the most healing ideas from Stoicism is simple. You can't control what others do, but you can control what you accept, what you tolerate, and what you choose next. As Epictetus reminds us, it's not events that break us, it's the meaning we attach to them. As Monica didn't win by screaming. She won by standing steady, gathering proof, setting boundaries, and refusing to beg for basic respect. And that's something you can carry into your own life. Document what matters, protect your dignity, and don't confuse love with control. If this story spoke to you, please hit like. Share it with someone who needs strength today, and subscribe, because we're telling more stories where truth shows up and karma doesn't miss.